We were in a high-end dining room. I sat opposite my mother, Mira, a woman who prized peace above all, and my stepfather, David, a corporate lawyer who always acted like he was the smartest man in the room. He was mid-toast when I interrupted, sliding a single laminated sheet across the table. David stopped, annoyed. "Anya, must you? We're celebrating," he scoffed, waving a hand. "Must you bring your little government paperwork to the table?" He used the voice he always reserved for me, the one that labeled my career a hobby. It was the same condescending tone he'd used for 15 years. I just looked at him, my voice flat, cold. "Look at it." He sighed and picked it up. He glanced at it, then his eyes snapped back. He really looked. It was just a visitor log, but his eyes zeroed in on the signature. His smug corporate smirk evaporated. The blood drained from his face. He shot a panicked look at my mother, whose hand was suddenly trembling. He looked back at me, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. Then, the heavy crystal water glass slipped right from his hand. It shattered on the floor, the sound ripping through the restaurant's quiet. But that was the end of the story. It began 2 days earlier, at my real job. I was at my duty station at Navy HQ. To my family, I'm just Anya, the glorified secretary. The reality is that I'm Lieutenant Colonel Anya Sharma, the Chief of Security and Protocol. Nothing gets into that building without my authority. That morning was high level. My team was managing access for a joint forces briefing. An Army general was visiting. As is standard, I personally oversee the SEEK log, the Secure Visitor Register, for all flag officers. The general arrived, signed the log, and was escorted to the Admiral's office. It wasn't until my standard end-of-day audit that my world tilted. I was reviewing the logs, pen in hand. And then I saw it. I just froze. My pen hovered over the paper. The signature. General Rohan Sharma. It wasn't a common name. It was his name. This was my father's name. The man my mother had told me died in a tragic training accident 30 years ago. The man I'd spent my entire life grieving. The man whose name was etched on the memorial bracelet I wore at that very moment. My mother's story was the bedrock of my entire life. He was a hero, lost too soon. But that signature, that was his. I'd know it anywhere. To understand the lie I was about to detonate, you have to understand the 2 lives I was forced to live. My childhood was built around a ghost. My mother, Mira, is a woman who needs emotion like air, and she painted my father, Rohan, as this tragic, sainted hero. He was the brave soldier who died too young, and our lives were defined by his noble absence. It was a perfect, untouchable story. It was also, as I now knew, a complete lie. When I was 10, my mother married David, my stepfather, a man completely obsessed with his own family's respectable lineage of lawyers and bankers. He saw the military as something beneath him. He brought his son into the marriage, Mark, my stepbrother, a trust fund kid, who became the golden child by proxy. Mark could do no wrong. He was the future of David's respectable world. I was just the strange souvenir from my mother's tragic first life. I remember one dinner vividly, back when I was still a captain. Mark, who wore his charisma like an expensive suit, was being toasted by the family. He'd just closed a minor real estate deal, some 2-bit office building, and David was beaming, pouring champagne. "That's my boy," he kept saying, his voice thick with pride. "Building a real legacy." Then everyone turned to me. That polite, empty, "What about you, Anya?" Look, I tried to sound casual, mentioning that I'd just been selected for a highly competitive intelligence assignment, one that people spend their entire careers trying to get. David actually patted my hand, that condescending, dismissive pat that always made my skin crawl. "That's nice, dear," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. But really, when are you going to leave that little government hobby and get a real job? I just stared at him, the word echoing in my head. A hobby, the years of training, the top secret clearances, the sleepless nights. A hobby. I looked to my mother for help, but she just offered that strained smile, the one that begged me not to make a scene. Later, when we were in the kitchen, she said it. "David's right, Anya," she said quietly, refusing to meet my eyes. "This military obsession. It's just not healthy. It's not what your father would have wanted for you." The irony of that statement was so thick I nearly choked on it. She was using the ghost she invented to stop me from following in his real footsteps. They had no idea. They pictured me in a dusty back office, filing, maybe making coffee for some mid-level bureaucrat. They couldn't even begin to imagine my real world. My hobby was being the lead counterintelligence officer for the entire Joint Task Force. My office wasn't a cubicle, it was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. A place where cell phones are illegal, and the walls are built to stop spies. Just last week, I was briefing my actual boss, Admiral Croft, a grizzled, but fair commanding officer who doesn't waste time on pleasantries. I wasn't asking for permission. I was giving my analysis. "Sir," I said, pointing to the secure projections, "the SIGINT package shows anomalous pips on the Blackfin network. I suspect a signals intercept." I didn't mince words. This isn't noise. This is hostile. I'm recommending a full Condition Zulu lockdown and a deep sweep by the ComSec team, effective immediately. I was asking to shut down communications for a critical task force. A call that could cost millions and disrupt operations across the Pacific. Admiral Croft just nodded, his expression firm. He didn't pat my hand. "Do it, Colonel. Your instincts are the only thing keeping this JTF from leaking like a sieve. I trust your call." That was it. No condescending pat, no talk of hobbies. Just respect. A word my family didn't seem to understand. My family saw a sentimental girl playing soldier. My command saw the gatekeeper for all of Navcom's Pacific secrets. For years, I kept those worlds separate. But that signature wasn't just a name. It was a ghost. And I decided I would finally use the only language my family understood: irrefutable proof. The shock lasted for maybe 30 seconds. Then, it solidified into something else. Something cold and precise. The kind of focused fury I usually reserve for an operational threat. This wasn't a family problem anymore. This was a breach. My mother's 30-year lie wasn't just a personal betrayal, a story told to a grieving child. It was now a matter of professional integrity. I wasn't going to go home and have an emotional meltdown. I was going to run a counterintelligence operation. My objective was simple, and I thought about it in all caps: verify identity and establish truth. My hands were steady. I couldn't just type his name into the system for a personal query. That is a fireable offense, and it would compromise everything I'd built. But I didn't have to. The man had signed my log. He was a visitor to my facility, under my watch. As chief of security, I had not only the right, but a professional duty, to verify the identity and credentials of all high-level visitors. My mother's lie had inadvertently given me the one tool I needed to expose it. This would be 100% by the book. I went to my secure terminal. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I drafted an official request to the Army's liaison office. It was sterile, professional, and completely routine, citing a standard security audit of my visitor logs. I requested the full visitor file for General Rohan Sharma, citing the specific military regulation 190-13 that governed physical security protocols. I hit send. It was just another piece of digital paperwork. But to me, it was everything. Now, I waited. The file arrived in my secure inbox less than an hour later. My pulse hammered against my ribs, but my expression was neutral. I opened it. And there he was. It wasn't the 30-year-old, smiling photo from my mother's nightstand. This man was older, powerful, his face marked by decades of command, wearing the 2 stars of a general. But the eyes were exactly the same. It was him, undeniably, irrefutably alive. I stared at the picture, letting the reality sink in. Then I closed the file. I couldn't proceed alone. This was now a flag officer matter. I requested a private meeting with Admiral Croft. He motioned for me to sit. "What is it, Colonel?" I didn't waste his time. "Sir," I started, my voice level, "I have a personal and professional conflict that I must report." I explained the logbook, the name, and the file I'd just pulled. "I have reason to believe a visiting flag officer is my father. The man I was told died 30 years ago. I have verified his identity." Admiral Croft stared at me for a full 10 seconds, his eyes searching mine. Then he picked up his secure phone. "Get me General Sharma's adjutant. I have a sensitive scheduling query from my CI chief." The trap was set. But first, I had one last family dinner to attend. We were at that restaurant, the one David, my stepfather, always chose because the wine list was expensive and the waiters fawned over him. He was holding court, of course, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand. He was bragging about Mark, my stepbrother, and some killer acquisition he'd just made. I just sat there, stirring my water, letting the familiar drone of his voice wash over me. The endless praise for Mark, the casual dismissal of everyone else. Then, inevitably, he turned to me with that smug, pitying smile. "And Anya," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Still filing papers down at the base? Keeping busy with that hobby?" I let the silence hang for a second. The familiar heat rose in my chest, the lifetime of being patted on the head, of being the sad, little military footnote. But this time was different. I waited until he finished his sip of wine. "Mom, David, I need to show you something." I pulled the laminated sheet from my briefcase and slid it onto the white tablecloth. It landed between the breadbasket and his wine glass. David actually laughed, that short, barking scoff. "Anya, must you?" "We're celebrating Mark," he said, pushing it back toward me. "Must you bring your little government paperwork to the table?" It was the same line, the same dismissive wave he'd used 100 times before. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the restaurant noise. "This one can't wait." He sighed, annoyed at the interruption to his performance. He picked it up. Fine. What is this? A visitor log?" He scanned it, bored. "Oh, wonderful. A general visited your little office. Good for you. Did you get him a coffee?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "Look at the name, David. Read the signature." He frowned, his eyes scanning again. "Sharma. General R. Sharma." He looked up at me, confused. "So? A general has your last name. It's not that uncommon." "Look at the first name, David," I said. "Rohan Sharma." I heard it before I saw it. A sharp, strangled gasp from my mother, Mira. David's eyes shot to her, then back to the paper. His brain, so sharp with corporate law, was finally connecting the dots. The Rohan from all those sainted hero stories, the name on my memorial bracelet. He looked at Mira's face, which was now as white as the tablecloth. He looked back at me, his arrogance completely gone, replaced by a baffled, creeping horror. That's not possible," he stammered. "He's dead. Mira, you said he was dead." I just stared at him. "No," I said. "He's not." And that's when it happened. The heavy crystal water glass, the one he'd been gripping, just slipped. It shattered on the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent, expensive room. All eyes were on us. And my mother, she just broke. The dam of 30 years burst open. And it wasn't pretty. It was a torrent of sobs, of gasps, of excuses that tumbled out of her. The truth spilled onto the table, ugly and messy. He wasn't dead. He was ambitious. A career officer on a long-term covert deployment. He was too ambitious. She wanted a different life. She wanted money, stability, a respectable civilian world. She had met David while my father was deployed. She had made a choice. She left Rohan, took me, changed our names, and told everyone, including me, his daughter, that he had died in a training accident. It was easier, she cried. It was cleaner than admitting she'd just left him, than admitting she'd abandoned a man everyone else considered a hero. I did it to protect you, she finally wailed, reaching for my hand. I did it to keep you away from that life, from that world. I pulled my hand back. I stood up slowly. The entire restaurant was quiet. I looked down at this weeping woman and this stunned, silent man. The cold, precise fury from my office returned. Protect me? I said, my voice shaking, but not with sadness, with rage. You lied. You didn't protect me. You erased my father. You let me grieve a man who was alive. I pointed at David, who looked small for the first time in his life. You let this man for 20 years belittle the very career my actual father was mastering. You let him call me a hobbyist, while my father was becoming a general. I looked back at my mother, and the final, horrible piece clicked into place. You didn't hate the military because you were afraid for me, Mom. You hated it because he chose it over you. You hated it because you couldn't control it. And you couldn't control him. I took my wallet out. I didn't slam it down. I placed my security badge, my lieutenant colonel credentials, on the table right next to the visitor log. This is who I am, I said. Lieutenant Colonel Anya Sharma, and unlike you, I don't run from the truth. I left them there, surrounded by the wreckage of their lies and the shattered glass on the floor. The lie that had defined my entire life was broken. But the truth was waiting for me back at HQ. My mother had just lost a daughter. I was about to find a father. The next morning, I was in my office at 0600. Admiral Croft, my commanding officer, had arranged it. A secure, video teleconference. My hands were steady as I initiated the connection, but my heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The screen flickered, then resolved. And there he was. Not a ghost, not a faded, smiling photo from my mother's nightstand. General Rohan Sharma. He was in his own office, an array of flags behind him, his uniform perfectly crisp. He looked professional and so incredibly tired. We stared at each other across the encrypted line for a long, silent moment. The protocol, the formality, was the only thing I had to hold onto. I cleared my throat, but my voice still sounded foreign, too formal. General Sharma, I began. I am Lieutenant Colonel Sharma, JTF Navcom. My own name felt strange on my tongue, addressing him. I reviewed your visitor file from 2 days ago. I paused, the next words feeling heavy as lead, an impossible weight. I believe I am your daughter. His professionalism just cracked. It was a tiny thing, a tightening around his eyes, a sharp intake of breath. But it was everything. He didn't move, but his eyes, my eyes, filled. He nodded, slowly, as if a heavy weight had just settled on him. Anya, he said. His voice was rough, thick with an emotion I couldn't name. Anya, I never stopped looking. He looked away from the camera for a second, a general collecting himself in the face of an impossible shock. Your mother. She just vanished. I thought you were gone. I thought you were both. He couldn't finish the sentence. The story he told over the next hour was devastating. It was the other half of my life. The half that had been violently amputated by my mother's lie. He'd been on a long-term no-contact deployment. Deep cover. The kind of assignment where you're a ghost for 18 months. You go dark and you pray your world is still there when you get back. He wrote letters, hundreds of them, all sent to a void, all eventually returned, unopened. When he finally came back, they were gone. The apartment was empty. No note. No forwarding address. She had met David. She had made her choice. She had changed her name, changed my name, and built an entirely new, respectable life on top of the old one, burying him beneath it. He'd searched for years. He'd used every private investigator, every database he could legally access. But he was looking for a Mira and an Anya with her maiden name. He was looking for a ghost. He never, not in a million years, imagined she would lie and tell me he was dead. He thought she had just left him. The idea that I had grown up grieving him, wearing a memorial bracelet for a living man, was a special kind of cruelty he'd never even considered. He'd finally given up, assuming they'd moved overseas, lost forever. And all that time I was just a few hundred miles away, wearing the same uniform, fighting the same fight. 6 months later, things were different. It wasn't a fairy tale. I didn't run into his arms. We didn't magically become a Hallmark movie family, making up for lost time over barbecues and Thanksgivings. It was awkward. It was two adults, two strangers, trying to build a 30-year bridge in a few months. We were both high-ranking officers, conditioned by decades of emotional control, professional duty, and the rigid structures of military life. We didn't really know how to do the simple father-daughter thing, but we knew how to do this. I found myself on a familiarization flight in a P-8 Poseidon, the Navy's most advanced maritime patrol aircraft. He'd arranged it. We sat in the cabin, the roar of the engines a steady hum beneath us, looking out over the vast empty blue of the Pacific. We didn't talk about my mother, or David, or the lost years. That was a minefield we weren't ready for. Instead, we talked about sensor packages. We debated logistical readiness versus strategic deterrence. We talked about the pressure of command, the loneliness of making a call no one else could make, the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. We were speaking our shared language, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt like someone in my family truly, fundamentally, understood me. A few weeks after that, I was at the podium. This wasn't a test, it was my job. I was in the main JTF briefing room, the tank, the one Admiral Croft ran his operations from. I was leading the weekly operational update on Blackfin, the very signals intercept I'd identified months ago, which had now become a full-blown counterintelligence operation. The room was full of senior officers, department heads, and intelligence analysts. This was my domain. I was confident, I was in command, and I was laying out the facts of our counter-op with cold, hard precision. As I motioned to the main screen to detail our next phase, my eyes scanned the back row, and I saw him. General Sharma. He was sitting next to Admiral Croft, attending as a visiting flag officer. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't beaming with paternal pride. He was just watching. He listened intently, his expression focused, analytical, his arms crossed. He was watching me, not as a long-lost daughter, but as a fellow officer. He was evaluating my brief, my command presence, my grasp of the strategic situation. And as I concluded my brief and moved to the next agenda point, I saw him give a single, almost imperceptible nod to Admiral Croft. A nod of professional respect, of acknowledgement. He wasn't proud of me simply because I was his blood. He was proud of me because I was good. In that single, quiet moment, I finally understood. My entire life, I had been an echo of a false legacy, the hobbyist daughter of a sainted ghost. But in this room, under these lights, I wasn't a ghost's daughter or a stepfather's footnote. I was a leader. I had built my own legacy. My mother gave me a life built on a lie. My father and I found each other through a truth written in a logbook. In the end, you don't inherit a legacy. You sign your name to it. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones hiding the biggest secrets. If you've ever uncovered a truth that changed everything, share your story in the comments. In this community, we value the truth.